Hey everybody, welcome to Strumming with Christopher. I'm Christopher Gallegos with Monterey County Free Libraries, Gonzales Branch. So, we recently talked about jazz for a while. We've talked about other styles of music, country, folk, blues. And if I'm looking at this evolution of at least Western music, not counting classical, that's a whole other thing. Western music is kind of a timeline. So we went from blues, country, jazz, and we're kind of moving toward the era of, I guess you could say, the 60s and 70s. And a style of music that started to really gain steam was rhythm and blues, also called soul music in some circles. And I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on R&B. I'm a huge fan. But as far as the guitar goes, a lot of the R&B I grew up with was keyboards and drum machines. 80s, 90s. So I guess we're talking about the R&B and the soul that you had in the 60s and 70s. And we've all heard a lot of these songs. You might hear them in the drugstore, on the radio station or something. It's kind of what we call classics, right? And a lot of this music, 60s and 70s, Motown, all that sound, there was more guitar in there. But it was never really the prime driver of that type of music. But there's a couple concepts. So there's two things I want to talk about today when it comes to rhythm and blues and soul music. Very obscure concepts, but not so much. So one is a chord progression that you hear in almost all music from the 60s and 70s that can be called soul or R&B. And it's interesting because it's only two chords, but it drives a lot of the songs. Sometimes you'll have a song where that'll be the whole song, two chords, and the chorus will just add more instruments or something like that. So it's essentially a minor seventh chord and what is called a ninth chord. I'm going to say major ninth. Yeah, major ninth. So we haven't talked about ninth chords yet, and a ninth is kind of like a blues chord, jazz chord, but it's a little bit different. But the shape's not that difficult. So we've talked about minor seventh chords in our jazz lessons. Now there are two types, and we're going to actually talk about them both today. The first one is this little shape where you use your middle finger and your ring finger to do this kind of bar chord thing here. So again, going to our typical fret 5 for our A example, you would have your middle finger basically playing this bass note on the 5th fret, E string. Underneath that, you're kind of muting it by having the finger pad muting that A string. And then you have a bar with your ring finger that's essentially barring the D string, G string, and B string. And the high E, if you can, you're trying to mute that too. So it's basically 4 notes. And that's a minor seventh shape that I remember talking about. Takes a little getting used to because it feels strange. It's a bar chord, not using your index finger, but it's a powerful chord. So it's a minor seventh chord, and then this ninth chord that is very typical to this kind of sound. A ninth chord flows very nicely into this. So in this case, it's going from an A minor seventh to a D ninth, D major ninth, and that ninth chord is really you're just kind of moving the bar down with your ring finger to these 3 strings, so the high E, B, and G, okay? And you're moving your middle finger down to 5th fret on the A string, okay? So you're not muting that string anymore. And then you have your index finger playing the 4th fret over here. And that's a D chord, D ninth chord, D major ninth. I would just say D ninth. So really it's just a type of blues chord, like a type of 7th chord. You can also use a 7th chord, but a ninth has a slightly different character. Okay, so in a lot of these old school R&B soul songs, 60s, 70s, Motown, etc., you hear that chord progression. And like at most other things I show you, you can move it, so. Kind of 2 chord progression is a driver of a ton of these hits. Yeah, so those two chords, very simple thing, just a 2-chord progression that flows. So you have that minor 7th, slight shift of the fingers, flows down into a 9th, and that's a big driver of that R&B sound. So play with that little progression. A minor 7th to a D major 9th. And the strumming's also fun. It's fun to kind of like count to 8 as you're doing that and get that rhythm. Let's be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Slow it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2. You start feeling this rhythm come along. And then there's another type of minor 7th chord. It's not as fun as this one, but it's a little easier to get your head around because it's 2 fingers. It's your ring finger, fret 7 on the A string, and your index finger barring all chords on the 5th fret. Sometimes a pinky actually is better. This kind of thing here. So these 2 fingers are not part of it, right? Sometimes you just end up intuitively adding more tension to your index finger. That minor 7th chord, there's another sound you hear in R&B guitar, and it's a different kind of concept. It's this minor 7th chord, and then once you strum it once or twice or whatever, then you start playing the corresponding minor pentatonic scale upward while holding the bar. Does that make sense? So it would look and sound like this. It's that kind of like hammer-on, pull-off thing. So essentially, your pinky and your ring finger are playing the notes of a minor pentatonic scale. While you're holding this bar here. So you're playing it kind of with these hammer-ons. So if you remember, I've talked about all these concepts. You're starting to see how it all locks together and makes a style. So A minor 7th chord. Usually it doesn't go up to these bass strings. It's the first 3 or 4. And it gives you this little riff. So it's like a chord, but it's also a riff. It's a chord and a pentatonic scale mixture. So really, if you strum up or down, the strumming's not important. It's kind of a function of your pinky and your ring finger doing those pull-offs, hammer-on pull-offs, which we talked about a long time ago, where you're either hammering onto the fret or you're pulling away, right? So you're holding that bar, and yeah, it's a little riff you hear in a lot of these classic R&B songs. Sometimes it's the beginning of the song. Sometimes it's like a little riff you hear at the end as they're fading out. So yeah, play with that. Yeah, that's going to be my discussion about R&B and soul. Because again, I'm a big fan, but guitar does not play an overly technical role in it. But you can use those 2 concepts, that A minor 7th to a D9, as a driver of an R&B type rhythm. Yeah, there's 2 little fun things to think about. Go back and listen to some Motown records and see what I mean. Thank you, everybody, as always. Onward and upward. See you next time.